Hello everyone, I am Tanja Kunz. I am a curator at the Vitra Design Museum, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to today's Instagram live talk about the life and work of Gaia Olenti together with Nina Artioli. Now, before we start our conversation, I would like to briefly introduce you to our guest, Nina. So Nina Artioli was born in 1979 in Milan, and she is an architect specialized in urban and landscape design. In 2006, she graduated with honors at the Faculty of Architecture at Roma Tre University and has been active as an architect and also as a teacher at prestigious universities such as the Politecnico di Milano ever since. Also in 2006, she founded her own firm, Teaspoon, together with Alessandra Gloria Lanza and Eliana Saracino, a studio which operates in the fields of architectural and landscape design, urban development, social innovation, and smart city, among others. Already before graduating, Nina started collaborating with the studio of her grandmother, Gaia Olenti, which she also functioned as a partner from 2012 to 2015. And in 2013, so after Gaia Olenti's death, she established the Gaia Olenti Archive, and since then has been actively involved in many exhibition and research projects about her grandmother's work, including our exhibition, Gaia Olenti, A Creative Universe, to which she contributed as a curatorial advisor, as an exhibition designer, and also as a lender. And in addition, she also gave the opening talk back in February, so a while ago, and she also kindly agreed to join us for today's conversation. So a very warm welcome to you, Nina. Thank you so much.
Thank you for this fantastic presentation.
Well, thank you. Well, so shall we get started with our questions? Are you ready?
I am. I'll do my best to answer all your questions.
Perfect. Perfect, thank you. So Nina, for those in our audience who might not know Gaia Olenti that well, or who might not have been able to see the exhibition also because of the lockdown, could you please give us a short insight into Gaia Olenti's life, her biography?
So let's start by saying Gaia Olenti was born in 1927 in the northern part of Italy, next to Udine. And she was born and then studied and started her life, but that the first main event that maybe also signed her career was the war. When she was really small, the Second World War just erupted in her life as a student. She had to finish her life as a student because the war actually interrupted all the life. And one thing she really said about those years were seeing all the ruins, all the disruption that the war had made around her was the first thing that made her think about architecture in the meaning of seeing all that disruption, all that macerie, as we say in Italian, make her think that architecture was something useful to have to reconstruct after the war. So that was the first time that she had a glance of what could have, what her career would have become. And then she chose Milan. She chose Milan, and after the war, she went to the Politecnico. Her family was in Biella, and she decided to move to Milan by herself to study at the Politecnico and eventually start her adventure as an architect. She graduated in 53, and in those years in Milan, there was a great group of people that she had in the university. And then she, after university, started with Rogers to work at the Casabella magazine. And there again, there was this big group and this really interesting Italian movement of architects that had the chance to discuss and to talk together in that magazine redazione in English, in that
Yeah.
anyway, in the group. And so that also was a great start for her, because it gave her the chance to really get immediately into what was the dialoguing in those years. And we know what the 60s in Italian architecture has been for all the post-rationalism and etc. But going back to her,
we'll come back to
brief,
that later anyway.
career,
Yes.
we will. That's why
Yes.
she started eventually, like many architects, working basically on, let's say, also smaller things, on design, on interior designs, because of course the occasion for a young architect was to work on these things. But already in these small things, we already can see an attempt to develop a certain way of being an architect. So her objects of design were eventually always developed for spaces. It's the years after the 60s, in which the relationship with Olivetti start, with the showrooms in Paris and in Zurich, where we can see the first, let's say, the most famous design made for the Pipistrello line, that was especially in those years, and was designed especially for the Olivetti showroom in Paris. And then we have the King Sun lamp for the Olivetti showroom in Zurich. And then it's the years in which she also starts a relationship with all the showrooms of the Fiat. And again, there are all occasions in which she can also start experimenting different ways of experimenting the being an architect. Then, of course, years go by. Her work and her starting to be international gives us more chances. And besides the work on interior and exhibition design that had started, eventually she has the occasions to work for the reconstruction or the transformation of the Gare d'Orsay in the Musée d'Orsay. It is actually the moment that changes things, that eventually changes her career, because of course a museum that big in Paris, it's a real change of perspective. Things come to be more serious. She has an international view also from Italian, and it is also the years, in those years, besides from Museo d'Orsay, we also have the renovation of Palazzo Grassi in Venice, and not more or less the same years, there is the Centre Pompidou in Paris. So it's years where she actually lives an international way of being an architect, and maybe concentrate mainly on renovation of museums, we can say, being very briefly. And from that moment on, of course, we can say that the elements of her architecture becomes more complex. We can start having a glance of what her world has been really being spread around the different ways of being architect, because it was not only about design, interior. In the 70s, she had also started working about all the, in the theater. She had starting also work for scene design. And besides the renovation of the architecture of the museum, from the 80s, she starts a long period of exhibition design. For Palazzo Grassi, she designs a lot of the exhibitions. And so that is a moment of consolidation, we might say. Then going over in the years, but I mean, at this point, her knowledge is already at a big level. And so she goes on in the other famous elements we know about her architecture. We can talk about the work in Piazza Cadorna in Milan. We can talk about the Italy Cultural Museum in Tokyo, the Italy Cultural Center, and many other projects that again give her a wider, even wider spread of the moments of being architecture. And we can't forget, besides her work of architect, another characteristic we have to name is that she has also been an intellectual. Parallel to her architecture life, all through the years, there has been a will of talking not only about architecture, but about really all the other aspects of the what the arts can be. And I think in every one of her projects we can find this. And just to name two of the last projects she was working at, and that she probably also loved a lot, was the airport in Perugia, in the center of Italy. That was one of her last and really loved projects. And again in Palermo, the renovation of Palazzo Branciforte, that was a palace in the center of Palermo that has now become a cultural center and hosts one of the nicer collections there are in Palermo. So I have to say, she has been till the really last moment of her life very active and very fond also of her work and projects.
And it's very good that you already addressed all the, you know, the various fields she was active in, because we will get back to all of these during our conversation. But let's first start with something that you also very briefly mentioned. She was and still is very famous in Italy, of course, and she played a crucial role in renewing and also revolutionizing Italian design and architecture after the war. And some of her projects, and you mentioned them before, Gare d'Orsay in Paris, they brought her worldwide attention. But strangely enough, she still doesn't seem to be as famous in the rest of the world, especially also in Germany, as she is in Italy. Of course, like some objects are very well known. You mentioned the pipistrello. Many people know the pipistrello, but very often they just know the design, but they don't necessarily know the designer who created it. Why do you think is that? Does it have to do something with the, let's say, general lack of recognition or attention for female architects and designers in the past decades? Or might there be another reason, such as Guy's own decision to not work in a particular style?
I know she has always been very independent. I think one of the reasons is because she has never been actually part of any cultural trend. She's not in an academic or university world. Her also wanting to experience architecture really in all the different fields of architecture is something that now we're not used to. I mean, her curiosity, transversal curiosity with all the different, as we were saying before, also arts of architecture, maybe brought her to this. I mean, she hated the idea and also the word archistar, because it was something with no meaning for her. It was, she had a very precise control of the work of her studio. I mean, today, when the world started to become international and we went towards a globalization and also the possibility to know a lot of things that were not in our world, also architecture firms have maybe been a little forced to become like cultural industries. The issues were not just the project, but have been marketing, imagine care, the development of a brand and a brief. And this was so far from Guy's architecture. I think she always wanted to have an artisanal firm. It was her 5, 6, 7, it depends, of course, on how much they were working, but they always had a will to be an architect. And I think this is also a reason, because she had her she had her how to say, her connaissance in the world, and she wanted to work. She didn't really care of how international we might see her with the eyes of today, because maybe instead it was she
Yeah.
achieved all that she wanted. So it's a different way of thinking of architects now.
It was very much about the work itself and doing what she
It was much
actually
about,
wanted
yeah,
to
it
do.
was definitely that. Of course,
Yeah.
independence and the transfer to quality counted a lot, but I think she was pretty
And
satisfied.
now, very good. Yeah. Something else, yeah, because I mentioned the lack of attention or recognition of female architects. If we come back to this, female designers and architects, Guy herself didn't really like this categorization because, as we just said, she just wanted to be recognized for her work. And there is also a quote by her that feminism is tiring. And unlike many other female designers and architects of her time, and you also already mentioned this, she never collaborated with a man. I mean, she did collaborate, but she didn't have a firm together with a man. She had her own company, her own office. She did her own work. She was independent. Would you nevertheless say that from today's perspective, we could consider her contribution to the emancipatory movement in Italian design and architecture as crucial? And if so, why and how?
Another quote she always said, it's that, yes, architecture is a job for males, but she really never took it even in mind. She really be an obstacle for her work, because thinking in this manner made her deconcentrate maybe from what was her real objective, her real aim, that was to do her work. So I think, at least for what has been my example, to see her as a woman, for her way of being, it has been much stronger seeing this, going to your objective without talking about being female. I mean, it was not the problem. It has been really more stronger than many other talks. I mean, now it is days in which we hear a lot talking about women architect. We have panels made only for women, and by women, talking about women, and I think it is a little distracting. I mean, if we are looking for equality, actually, it should be to talk about the projects and not about how difficult it is for a woman architect to talk about and see the projects. But eventually, it is also true, it is important to talk about this, because or else nobody will point it out. But for Guy, I'm sure it has been the strongest way was to just not think about. Of course she knew, I mean, she was not stupid, and she definitely had it in mind, but it was really a way not talking about it and not concentrating on this pact. Maybe it was a way not to have too many obstacles in the way.
And not like pointing it out, just doing her work as an architect, not discussing about whether she's male or female. And that's very emancipated and very independent. She just did what she wanted to do, and she, you know, she didn't have, or she wasn't limited or restricted by the fact that she was a woman. She did it anyway, and she didn't even want to be engaged in the discussions.
Exactly. It's looks like a bit, I don't know, not snob is the right way, not talking about it, because of course it is important, as we were saying. But for her, it worked better. And maybe for a lot of people, it is also a guide of a way to go through things and just think about your job, think about doing things properly and the best you can, and that would be the best answer to how you're good at doing your work.
Now, you also mentioned it, and I also said it, like even though she had her own company, etc., she was, especially at the beginning at university and in her starting years at Casabella, she was in touch and exchange with many of her contemporaries, male and female. And you already mentioned Ernesto Nathan Rogers, who was the editor of Casabella at that time and also Domus before. And he was also an architect and a theorist. Could you tell us a little bit more how she might have been influenced by people such as Rogers, but also other architects and designers of her time? Like in what kind of circles was she active? Whom did she like? But also maybe whose work or ideas did she maybe criticize or dislike? Just to get a little bit a clearer idea how, you know, how she engaged with her contemporaries.
When she did university and eventually graduated in 53, Rogers, of course, was already a reference point, and most of her colleagues of architecture, let's remember that it's not like now that in architecture university were hundreds of people, but they were very few, and so it was a relation of dialogue that started in university, and eventually then went on in the work for Casabella, where Rogers was director. He had added the word continuità when he entered Casabella, and this was an attempt to create again a dialogue between what was before or the modern movement and what they wanted to be, and to put into dialogue rationalism instead, the will of talking again about stylistic features that could actually become into use again. And so all the work done in Casabella is certainly the starting of it all. And in the staff, all the colleagues that were there, we can nominate Aldo Rossi, we can nominate Vittorio Grigotti, and there was Canella, and also Giancarlo De Carlo. It was, I think, she often said that the years in Casabella had been really of a great studio chance, also the opportunity to have also a real dialogue, an intellectual growth, because she had the possibility, and in there the group and the staff really worked talking and discussing about architecture and thinking about architecture. Of course, she sometimes said that she was a witness of like a battle between the roosters of the board, of the men that were there, and she also said she would look at them with like a sly attitude, talking them from a little distance, like maybe only women can do, not being involved in all this. But that was certainly a great start to start seeing things as architecture could be. Yes, functional, yes, start and simple, but it had to find a way of also giving a form, something that may be taking a new design also for architecture. And the first thing she had started to work at of design, of course, tell this. Then Rogers, another important teaching of Rogers, she always says this, that he taught her that being in architecture, first of all, was to be an intellectual. And Gaulenti never missed the opportunity to study and to research all the literally historical, also musical elements that she could get in making her work. So that certainly is an important thing that she got from Rogers. Besides, of
Mm-hmm.
course, then there is the famous sentence from The Spoon to the City. Again, as we said before, certainly Gaio Lenti made this transversality of being an architect another character of her own way of working and personality. So let's say that this has the relationship with Rogers definitely found in her some real basis. They founded her.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Then about talking of her colleagues, she was not very into that. Most of the time
Okay.
it was because they were years where you maybe didn't focus on that. She has always had a great respect with many of the colleagues, naming Vittorio Gregotti for one. It has been really a lifetime, also friendship relation, always with great,
Mm-hmm.
but of course they criticized themselves. Maybe the best thing they had, one for the other, of course in different roles, but having the opportunity to discuss together, as they had started
Yeah.
maybe in
Mm-hmm.
the editorial board in Casabella Continuità. It has really been, they had never, I had the chance to hear them discuss. There was never afraid of telling each other what they wanted to say, and that I think is
Mm-hmm.
the best relation you can have with your colleagues.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, interesting. Now let's get back to her actual work. We already said that she didn't want to work in a particular style, as she rather wanted to focus on the specific circumstances and also purposes of a project. Could you describe this and also other key elements of her design approach or design philosophy in a little bit more detail for us?
She nominates in a description 3 principles of architecture she would have loved to recognize herself in. That were, as she says, characteristic, mainly aesthetical and not moral. That means the first principle was the analytical one, the capacity, not the principle. And the capacity of analysis is the capacity to recognize in each work one is doing the context. The context meaning urban traces, geography traces, in the case of working in the city, but context means, of course, also many other things if you go down into scale. But anyway, the important is having first moment of analysis to comprehend where you are and what are the
Yeah.
ingredients you have in hand to work with. Then the second capacity is the synthetical one. That means that after having studied and then having understood which are your ingredients you have in hand, then if you want to be clear in your work and actually have determine the principles of architecture, you have to be able to create a synthesis of your work and actually put it into shape as a clear element of architecture to tell who is looking at you and eventually who is also experimenting your architecture. And the third one is also at the end is the prophetical one. Prophetic, that meaning she imagine it as the capacity of poets, artists, inventors. That meaning not only it's not really true that she didn't want to have a form, because of her course, her architecture is also recognizable. But this prophetic mean that you can do something, that add a step also to your architecture, and that you can make also people that experience again your architecture, your exhibition design, or use your object, then can have a step forward. And she always really liked to talk about the possibility of creating a reaction in whoever stepped into one of her projects. And so that.
And yes, sorry, continue.
No,
please.
that is one of the.
That's it. Yeah.
That is one of the ways she tried to explain what were the main points of her being of her work as an architect.
Yeah, of her like principles or her approach to creating.
Yes, she was not very theoric, so she really didn't often try to synthesize again her principles. So it was much more of okay, you read my architecture, and then again, I am not historical nor. So I use her words because I think they are particularly clear to understand the way of working on, as we said, any job, any work of she had the chance to work on.
And how much, even though, like, how much would you say was she maybe, at least at the beginning, influenced by the premises of the Reformatory and the counter design movements in the 50s and the 60s? Because she started, like after Casabella, she started to design furniture, and then she moved on to architecture. And I was always wondering, how was she influenced by what, like all the movements in design that were happening at that time? Actually, was she a child of her time in the way she designed, or not that much?
I always try to give an answer as a person who knows her and not as a critic of architecture.
Yeah.
I think, of course, she is a child of her time because, as you were mentioning, design before didn't exist. In those days, of course, as it is now, as you start as a young architect, of course, you can't. The first thing you start doing is not big buildings, but of course you start from the basis. And in those years, she talked a lot about how with the industries, it was something they were really doing research. So in the design, it was not about designing something, because that didn't really exist as a meaning, but they were experimenting what you could really do with materials. We have to remember a little years later, all the work with Fontanarte. She had been creative director of, and it was really a work about experimenting the materials and imagining. I have in mind just now the lamp that the Patroclo that is also in the Vitra Design Museum. How working with glass, that is one of the most delicate materials we can nominate, is compressed in an armor of metal. And when you see it, the glass explodes in, and the glass goes through the holes of the armor, and it is actually looking at it, it looks so powerful. And so I think in going back to your question was, of course, in those years they had to deal with all the architecture that had been there before, that was so clean, so essential, so also precise, and what in those years was the attempt to go back to a dialogue, as Rogers was one of the continuity he tried to express in the work of Casabella, is what they all started to doing. Then again, and she was so independent, so I'm not sure that I can say that she was totally in the flow of those years and But of course, she is a child of that time.
And also because some of her objects are also a little bit humorous, or they tell stories, like Pipistrello or Ruspa. Many of her lamps actually, and they're also very bold. They're not minimalistic at all. They're brave, I
But
would
they're very
say. They're
controlled.
colorful often. Also, yes, it's this interesting mixture of both. Yes,
That was the
exactly.
attempt, I think. The work was exactly
Yeah.
that, to be functional,
Mm-hmm.
but not to be essential in the way the prophetic capacity we were talking about before was exactly the opposite. Okay, you
Yeah.
have to analyze, you have to take a place. The lamp is never just to be there to be looked at, but the lamp has to illuminate. That's his first,
Yeah.
the first, and she always says this, and she uses it
Mm-hmm.
also in all the architecture she does. It has to be there to do something, but it's just that's
Mm-hmm.
not the only reason. It has to stay there and be minimalist, but it can express a thought, it can express a gesture, it can express a form. That's why, of course, it's not a lack of will of giving a sign, but it's the attempt of giving it with a background that again is
Yeah.
the analysis and the synthesis we were talking about before.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And from today's perspective, which of the key elements of her design philosophy or approach would you still consider as relevant, or and also as inspirational for the architects of our, but maybe also future generations? Like, what can we learn from her?
I personally think that the it's not about the principle of architecture, but it's a way of being an architecture. The
Yeah.
transversality
Mm-hmm.
and maybe the curiosity to not stick
Mm-hmm.
into our worlds. I mean, we are, again,
Mm-hmm.
so many architects today. We are asked to be so specialized that we have to be the best of what we only are doing. And this, I
Mm-hmm.
think, keeps us in closed worlds. We
Yeah.
study so much to go deep into things that maybe we find ourselves alone in small worlds. And I think instead, being transversal and curious and really willing to mix different arguments that are not and haven't to be only about architecture, but have to literature, art, music in them, is what is actually the best thing I think we can take from her, because it's much more filling. You have to have
Mm-hmm.
all these influences, I think, to do a better job. I mean, now we're constantly with our cellular phones that give us the chance actually to be in contact with a wide, I mean, enormous amount of information, of connection, but they
Mm-hmm.
all remain really, really on the surface. We never have the
Mm-hmm.
chance to really talk about them and to really get in relationship with these arts. That it's what makes instead the relationship between peoples and profession, that gets more into
Mm-hmm.
this. I bet
Mm-hmm.
each one of us architect to tell all the time they have been to a dinner or to some occasion, to count how many architects are with them, and we are always the majority, and it's never you're the only architect in a bunch of artists and I
Mm-hmm.
don't know what else. So I think we can take this as the principle, the more important principle we can
Yeah.
get, and I think also give to future generations.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Now, Let's get back to something else. You briefly addressed the theater.
Yeah.
Gao Lenti was also a stage designer. You mentioned this. Could you tell us a little bit more about her special relationship to the theater, or her love for the theater, and also how it influenced her architectural practice? And in conjunction with this, maybe you could also give us some insights into her relationship with Luca Ronconi, the theater director, that she had collaborated with on multiple different projects.
Yeah, she started her first works in the theater with Luca Ronconi. He was in the, I'd say, half 70s. They started the first play. And Ronconi, of course, gave her the opportunity to experiment architecture in another field. And that, of course, for her was so interesting and was such an occasion that she she was diving in that, because it was and of course Ronconi has also been one of the most important and the most thinking theater directors of our Italian history of theater. And so that, of course, was a great occasion. And I think they found each other. I mean, that both of them were really intrigued, I think, from what one could give to the other. I mean, for Ronconi, working with Gaia was not just having an architecture that gave form to his ideas, but again, was a person with who he could develop the ideas. And for Gaia, working for the theater was an occasion also to maybe also experiment things that in architecture could not be experimented. I mean, she says that theater is actually very different from architecture, because the scenography has a precise place, and it is the action of the theater that makes it come alive. You can, that's, I mean, again, she said actually that the important difference was the relationship between space and time. That in the theater is a primary relation. So the definition of the space of the theatrical, the space of the theater is given by the time of the action of what happenings and in the precise moment. But you can recognize the stage anyway. The stage is always there. It's what's happens inside that is in continuous transformation. It is recognizable but changes, and that makes the difference instead with architecture, that instead is based on the traces of the place, and that has to become not only a physical but also a conceptual relation. But again, what I think they were really special in their relationship. Of course, in the professional, they actually gave to life to a few of the most important theater experiences in Italy, like the Laboratorio di Prato. It was actually a lab of 3 years in which they experimentated the relation between space, time, the actors, and it was something that really set the difference between what was before and after that. And so I think this, again, we go back to a relation of dialogue that creates something that is not just a product, it's not just the play, it's not just the scene, but it is what the process of the two talking and discussing and adding each one to the work of the other something. So I think they got a great, they both got a great strength about their relationship, that of course was not only professional, but then became a really also personal relationship of friendship, as we were saying before with Grigotti. And once you get, I think, into this contact, then it's you go to a step of profound relationship that gives you something greater.
And movement as one of the key elements in theater, but actually also I once read that she what she learned from the stage design, movement in space, she transmitted to the museum, because at the museum movement is also very crucial. We move from one room to another, and there is a specific way how to see an exhibition, etc. And museums were also one of her specialties, and or something that she enjoyed working on. And you mentioned the Gare d'Orsay, that she turned into a museum, the Palazzo Grassi in Venice. Then there's also the Asian Art Museum in San Francisco. It was a historical building as well that she transformed into museum. She redesigned a part of the galleries at the Centre Georges Pompidou. And there were many other museum projects. And she was also an exhibition designer. You mentioned that as well. Where did this fascination for the museum come from? And how did she approach these kinds of projects?
You're right saying that movement was important, because she always said that the museums were places of high pedagogy. I mean, the visiting is not just something you do passively, but it's actually a job. She nominates this as a work. You have to go there, and the will was not to have museums in which you enter, and the aim was not to create a narration, but was create moments of relation. So all the design was made also being disturbing, also being with the will of questioning you, and of course of creating occasions for getting you into a direct connection with the art you're looking at. And of course it was something a lot also about the moments, the different moments in which your visit has to be experienced. So with you have the opening and closing of paths. You have the pauses, the movements, single or multiple observation of works, and comparisons, and all this was in the idea of what had to be a museum design. Then, of course, another mostly important work was the one made on the museography. Also talking about Orsay, she describes how the approach to the project of the museum had to start from the study of the museography program. So to have a concrete and very precise analysis of the works that had to be exposed, and understanding the how to group them, how to also decide the rhythm with you could go through them, and having an idea of the itinerary that you could make, but starting from what you had to see. And then, of course, this has been, you can talk about this both in the museums, but also in the exhibitions. I mean, we can remember the Palazzo Grassi exhibitions like one of the most experiencing exhibition that there was, with the one with which Palazzo Grassi has been opened, that was about futurism, was really something that shouted itself out loud. You could really see things and had the glance of these elements were really, and you could not do anything but just stare at them with your mouth open. Then another thing, of course, that is mental, especially for the design of the museums, is the relation, because we're talking about working in already defined architectures, is the relation with the object. And in that cases, it's clear, like the principle she adopted was not to be in how do you say, in a stylistic continuity, but there is always a reading of the context and deciding to adopt a principle also of opposition, maybe, surely of dialogue again. So of saying, okay, I understood you. This is what happens now. And another basic element is, of course, lighting. She talks a lot about lighting, about how to also balance the natural lighting in museums, and to study the correct light control. We know she has collaborated and also designed most of the lamps that she used, both for Musée d'Orsay and Palazzo Grassi, and that is another really important issues about the museum designing. I hope I am answering correctly to all of your...
Yeah, of course. No, sure. It's still very interesting for me, because we've talked often, you know, during the preparations, but I can still learn new things and hear other connections, etc. So I'm also just, you know, still learning, which is great. Just had the idea that, you know, the principles for the architecture, or how to deal with the project of a museum, and then the exhibition design as something, again, like the theater, where you can also go all in if you want, where you can experiment, where you can do things that you cannot do with buildings, or when you create a long-lasting architectural product, you can experiment more. So she had her ways to, and also objects, her object designs, they can also be a little bit or even more experimental than a building, let's say, or airport, etc. There needs to be a function and it needs to be fulfilled. So she had her ways to keep to keep being experimental, and at the same time she did all the other things, and that's very interesting. Now let's also, because it's almost 7, but we're not quite done yet, but we're getting there. We talk a lot, I would be, or if you allow me, I would like to ask you some more personal questions now towards the end. Nina, you are an architect as well, and you spent several years working for and with Guy. And how was that? How was a typical day at the firm? And also, what did you learn from her during that time working side by side with her? And how has she influenced you personally in your practice as an architect?
I can't start by saying that, of course, I have been such a lucky person to have the opportunity to know her, not only as a parent and to have her as example for all, also we said now, because of course with her work, with her strength, with her way of being precise and just at the aim, of course, she taught me a lot. As an architect, maybe the most important thing is the one I was talking about before. So really the way of being architect in our minds more than the gesture. It has been very, very experiencing to have the chance to work in the studio, because of course when I was out of university, and also while I was doing university, I could see such nice projects, and I started working with a few museum exhibitions, and one was arts and architecture exhibition in Genova with Celant as a curator, and that was great because that was the personification. I mean, it was art and architecture, and so it was really, it has been more than a mouthful experiences and things. But in the studio, what was certainly pointed out, even if for anyone that entered, was on one hand again, we were saying before, the artisanal way of creating the studio. I mean, there was this guy, she had this 2-story building in Milan that she had emptied and renovated with all different level floors. And so it was an enormous open space where everybody had their private space. And it was a bit, on one hand, yes, something artisanal. I mean, we were on the lower level working at all the projects, and she used to enter and call by name who she wanted to see, to had in the morning the first advice and on the project. So we used to go to her, climb up the stairs, talk about what was happening. So in this sense, she had a control of everything. She knew any aspect of the project. It was not just the idea and the first kick of the project, but she also knew all the technical issues that could come out, even with the structural or the all the engineers of all the technical elements. And so that was
because she kept it small, right? She never wanted to have a gigantic office. Yeah,
she wanted to have the control, because for her all the aspects were important. It was not just the sign, the idea, the general look of what came up, but it was actually also she loved working also to the details, to the solutions of architecture solutions, more in the concrete. So that was certainly something that you could read entering. And it was also, she of course has been a strict boss, because of course to do a strict and strength, I don't know, because if you want to have this control, I think, on things, you have to be determined, and maybe this determination you have to be a little more pushy, maybe, that you would like to be, or that you naturally would be. I mean, also with me, that of course I was her granddaughter. Of course, I'm sure she loved me the most, but working, that she would never show that. It was, okay, what you're doing, tell me, don't tell. She was very with me, but with everybody it was so okay. I mean, I know the people that have worked with her for years have fought and maybe hated and loved her at the same time, because of this this type of dialogue that was precise, strict, based on things, based on actually what you had in hand, what were your drawings, and not about talking things or concepts. It was really, okay, let's see things. And that was really interesting. Then again, I also had the occasion to have the other side, and so the capacity of giving instead. Maybe the thing I had the most from her was the occasion to see her in all these occasions. So seeing the people with whom she had the chance to work, seeing the artists, the musicians, this has certainly been the other side of the medal that, of course, has given me at least the same as experience. Important to the same way.
Very interesting. Is there a favorite project in her work, or a favorite object, and why is it your
A
favorite, or is
favorite
there no
project, I
favorite?
don't know. I have a personal favorite object, that is the lamp rimorchiatore. That is a
Okay, yes.
small, compact element, not an element. It looks at the first glance as a compact element. It's made of different pieces. You, at the first glance, can't really understand which are the functions. That there
Mm-hmm.
is two different type of illumination. There's a place in which you can have pens or flowers, and there is another small area in which you can put also objects, little objects. And I think that is, I like it because it can be also like it could be a little like her, because it's precise, it's compact, it's geometrically really controlled, but it's, if you look at it, it's something really 70s and pop, but in the
Yeah.
same
Mm-hmm.
time it has a control and a precision. So you look at it,
Mm-hmm.
it's one compact element, but if you look at it better, you see all the complexity of the elements and all the ideas and the thoughts that are in that. And in the same time, you can see it as a really 70s design pop, and with glimpsy, but it's in the same time also very precise and modern. So
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
that's maybe is one of my favorite objects. Projects, I don't know. I have to think about that.
That's fine. Like the Rimorchiatore is like the essence actually of what she stands for. It's like all in one object, like everything we talked about. So that's actually very nice to have this as your favorite object. Um, Now, as my last question for our talk, I would also like to briefly talk about the Aulenti archive and preserving Guy's legacy. And what are your plans for the archive in the near future, but also in the long future? And like, what kind of projects are you working on at the moment, or contributing to also keep preserving her legacy?
I have to start saying the archive, the existing of the archive was not immediate, because Gaia
Mm-hmm.
never gave us a hint of what she
Oh,
wanted
mm-hmm.
that we could do, or
Mm-hmm.
what she wanted for the future once she was not there. Because again, she was so precise, she lived her life, and that she didn't probably want to give us a
A
bundle to
burden or
carry too
mm-hmm.
heavy, because of course it is there. We can't say it's not there, and we also know it's a legacy that is not our own. Me and my
Mm-hmm.
family. It's not just something about our personal legacy, but there is certainly something that has to be shared and made independent. But
Mm-hmm.
the idea when she passed away in 2012 was to say, okay, now what can be our work in the years? What can we do? So we first started a work of 2 years that we actually that made us have the idea of what was the whole. We're talking about more than 700 of projects from the
Yeah.
53 when she graduated to 2012, and of course something
Mm-hmm.
went even over in time, and
Yeah.
so we understood the complexity of
Mm-hmm.
the work we were talking about. And then we decided that the studio, the house studio she had in Milan, that is a place that really tells about her, like probably
Mm-hmm.
most persons could do, because it's actually a place where she had sedimented in the years all the
Mm-hmm.
objects and books and occasions, and you actually see there the stratification of her life. And
Yeah.
you
Mm-hmm.
enter that place and have around really tons of stories that the place tells you.
Yeah.
And you can see both the results of her work, but also in a way the references from where her
the
work,
influence,
the
the
influences.
basis,
And so that
everything.
was a place we had to keep as it was, with the attempt of telling a bit more that are not only the projects. I mean, in about 10, 15, 20, I don't know how many years, I think that her work will be in a way more institutionalized. The drawings are there, they can be consulted. Probably, I don't know if it will still be the family that can host this, because of course it's not easy, but surely I think that going from a person alive to something that will be shared in time, we have the need, or I think we have the will to tell a bit more of what what we have been talking maybe in this occasion. So all that is between the lines of the projects, between the drawings, all the stories, the relationships, that are not easy, because again, she was very concrete. Not concrete is, seems the material, very precise. So she kept the drawings, but they are maybe not so many letters and things that you can then help you read the context. And since I think that for her, and for anyone, but for her especially, this is so important. It's the aim that that I gave myself for these years. And so now what we're working at is finding occasions to tell these stories and these things that are around her works, in the strict meaning of just her projects.
So like exhibitions like ours and other exhibitions you already did.
We're working also on a small book. We're also working on something about the photos. She was also a photographer, in the sense that she used it as an occasion to study and to look at things. And looking at her photos again, you can see a little what we have been talking about, because she was photographing architecture, but people, but elements of everyday life. And it's a nice way of having another point of view on her and her work.
Yeah. So there's still a lot to do, still a lot
there's
to
plenty
work
to do
through and to prepare for people to have a look at it. That's great. We will stay tuned, all of us. Nina, is there anything else you would like to add before we finish today's conversation, or anything you would like to mention, or a final word?
No, I think we've said a lot.
Dramatic.
I won't say a final word. I hope it will. There will be a lot of occasions in which we can talk and have the chance to talk a little about her work, because I think also it is a starting point. I mean, now Gaulenti has been certainly a figure that when she was alive, because of her independence, because of her will to be transversal, as we said, has been loved, but also criticized. So I think now that a few years have passed, now that we can because of course I'm too involved, but the architecture critics and historical figures can have the chance to look at her work in a different way, not just looking at the architecture as it is in the context, in the historical context, of course, but having a chance to look at it of how complex this has been. And as we were saying before, as we can look at it to have experiences of what can be our way of being architecture and what we could take as a legacy.
Great.
And so
then Nina, yes, sorry.
And so I think the final words can only be a thank you for this this talk.
Well, thank you.
It's been nice also because I hope this also will be an occasion to have an interest for the exhibition in Vitra that it's
Yes.
true has been closed, but now there is still a little time from now to April, March. Remember me
Yes. No, it's April.
Oh,
Yeah, it's throughout April. So we really hope that we can open again at some point, that people can come and see the exhibition, discover her work. That would be great. But already, I guess, through the talk, there was a lot to learn and discover today. And thank you so much, Nina, not only for the talk, but for the great collaboration throughout. I had the pleasure. When did we start working together? It was
too much time ago.
2019 in autumn. It's more than a year, yeah. And yeah, I've learned so much, and I keep being interested and curious in Gaolendi's work. And well, I will also observe what you're going to do next, and I hope that everything will work out great, and that we will see and hear more about Aulenti in the future.
I'll do my best.
Thank you, Nina.
Thank you,
Then,
Tanya. It's been a pleasure. Bye to
thank you
everybody.
so much. Bye to
Bye.
everyone.
Bye
Have a
bye.
good evening. Bye.